Imagine a building that held the sum of human curiosity. A place where scrolls from Greece, Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and China rested side by side. The Library of Alexandria, in the minds of many, was not just a library. It was a dream crystallized into stone and papyrus. It represented what humanity could become if knowledge was allowed to grow without interruption. And then, according to legend, that dream burned. The image is seared into our cultural memory, towering flames licking the night sky, scholars weeping in the shadows as centuries of learning turned to smoke. But was this how it truly happened? Or is this vision itself a myth? One carefully constructed, exaggerated, and retold until it became more powerful than truth. To understand, we must first step back from the poetry of loss and look at the tangled threads of history. The truth is not a single night of fire. It is a slow unraveling, a sequence of wounds inflicted over centuries, until the heart of the library could no longer beat. The first suspect in this tale is Julius Caesar. In 48 BCE, during the siege of Alexandria, Caesar set fire to ships in the harbor to block the Egyptian fleet. The flames leapt from vessel to shore, consuming warehouses and, it is said, part of the library's collection. Ancient historians like Plutarch and Seneca mention the loss of books, but none agree on the scale. Was it hundreds of thousands of scrolls, as later writers claimed? Or was it only a small portion, a tragic but not total destruction? The silence of some sources and the vagueness of others leaves us guessing. And into that gap, myth begins to pour. Another chapter in the library's demise is attributed to the Roman Emperor Aurelian in the 3rd century CE, whose battles to reclaim Alexandria may have damaged the district where the library, or one of its branch collections, stood. Later still, in the 4th century, the decree of Theophilus, Patriarch of Alexandria, ordered the destruction of pagan temples, including the Serapeum, which housed a daughter library. Here, politics and religion intertwined, and knowledge was collateral damage. But even this was not the final blow. In the 7th century, the story emerges that the Muslim conqueror Caliph Omar ordered the remaining books burned, allegedly saying, "If they agree with the Quran, they are unnecessary. If they disagree, they are heresy." Yet this account appears in sources written centuries later by Christian chroniclers with political motives. Many historians believe it is apocryphal, a convenient villain crafted long after the fact. And so we see the pattern, not one fire, but many, not one act of barbarism, but a gradual erosion. The myth of a single cataclysmic night is compelling because humans understand tragedy better when it has a dramatic climax. The slow decay of knowledge is harder to visualize and far more disturbing because it means the loss was preventable at many points and not the fault of a single enemy. It was the fault of time, of neglect, of shifting priorities, of the way civilizations can turn away from wisdom when it no longer serves power. Think of what might have been inside. The works of lost historians like Berossus, who chronicled the kings of Babylon from before the flood. Maps drawn from voyages no other culture remembered. Treatises on medicine, engineering, astronomy, and philosophy from cultures now gone. Imagine reading an unbroken chain of human thought, seeing how ideas mutated and improved as they passed from India to Greece to Egypt to Rome. The library could have contained the seeds of discoveries that we would not make again for another 1,000 years. But here is the paradox. We cannot know exactly what was lost, and in that uncertainty, the myth grows. Every gap in history becomes a place for our imagination to bloom. The myth serves a purpose beyond lamentation. It is a warning, a moral story told by each generation to remind itself of the fragility of knowledge. By imagining the library's destruction as a single act, we create a villain to despise and a hero to wish for, a guardian who should have stopped it. But history tells us that the true threat to knowledge is rarely a dramatic inferno. It is apathy. It is underfunding, censorship, decay. It is the slow death of curiosity under the weight of political expediency, and that is far more frightening because it is still happening. Even now, digital archives can vanish with a corrupted server. A hard drive can fail, a website can be deleted, a war can turn a city's museums into rubble. The burning of the Library of Alexandria is not only an ancient story, it is a recurring one. We have seen it in the destruction of the National Library of Sarajevo in 1992, in the looting of the Iraq Museum in 2003, in the quiet closure of underfunded archives around the world. The lesson is not that knowledge dies when enemies attack. It dies when friends do nothing. And so, we return to the myths. Why do they persist? Because they speak to something primal, the fear that we could lose ourselves, our history, our identity in a single night. They give us a villain, yes, but they also give us a vision of what we must protect. The Library of Alexandria may never have burned exactly as we imagine, but the idea of it still shapes us. It is a ghost haunting the corridors of every university, every archive, every dusty shelf in a forgotten library. It is the reminder that what we know today exists only because someone, somewhere, decided to preserve it. So, what if the library still existed in secret, untouched by flame or time? That question belongs to another chapter. For now, the story of its burning, mythical or not, reminds us that the line between preservation and oblivion is as thin as paper and just as easily consumed. Beneath the modern streets of Alexandria, cars pass over ancient bones. Children run across courtyards where once philosophers debated the structure of the cosmos. The scent of coffee from street vendors drifts over cobblestones that hide the ruins of 1,000 forgotten lives. And deeper still, deeper than the dust of Rome, deeper than the brickwork of Byzantium, there may be something else, something sealed away, hidden from eyes and time. The idea that beneath the living city lies the dead heart of the library is both romantic and unsettling. If true, it means the greatest collection of human thought is not gone. It is sleeping in vaults that no one dares to open. Archaeologists know that cities like Alexandria are built in layers. Centuries of earthquakes, fires, and reconstructions mean that the ancient city is not gone. It is merely buried. Every time a modern foundation is dug, shards of the past emerge. Coins stamped with the faces of forgotten rulers. Fragments of pottery that once held wine sipped under moonlight. Inscriptions in languages long dead. In 1996, an underwater expedition discovered part of the royal quarter beneath the harbor. Columns, statues, and temple ruins submerged for over a millennium. If entire palaces can vanish beneath silt and tide, why not vaults of scrolls? Why not a hidden chamber, its stone doors still sealed, its air untouched since the last librarian stepped away? The theory is not without foundation. Ancient writers mention secure storage rooms. Repositories separate from the main reading halls, where rare or delicate works were kept. In times of unrest, these could be locked away, inaccessible to the public, but safe from the chaos outside. Imagine such a place, its shelves lined with scrolls bound in red and gold, its walls cool and dry in the dim light. Imagine that, as the city fell into one disaster after another, the entrance was blocked by debris, forgotten even by those who once guarded it. Centuries later, new streets were built over the ruins, sealing the vault deeper still. Generations came and went, and what was once the crown jewel of civilization became a rumor, a ghost in the city's foundations. There are stories whispered among the locals, of construction crews who break into strange ancient rooms and are told to keep silent. Of vaults found beneath government buildings, their walls lined with inscriptions no one can read. Some say the authorities know exactly where certain chambers are, but they are too dangerous to open, not because of physical traps, but because of the political storms that their contents might unleash. What if such a vault contained proof that history, as we know it, is wrong? What if it held treaties that never made it into the textbooks, philosophies that would undermine religions, or technologies that could unbalance the modern world? The temptation to keep such a find hidden would be immense. And if such vaults exist, the question is not only whether they hold scrolls, but what condition those scrolls might be in. Papyrus can survive for millennia under the right conditions: low humidity, darkness, stable temperature. We know this because of the Dead Sea Scrolls, preserved for 2,000 years in desert caves, their ink still legible. A sealed underground chamber in Alexandria could provide similar conditions. The difference is scale. While the Dead Sea Scrolls numbered in the hundreds, the library could have stored hundreds of thousands. Entire civilizations' worth of literature could be waiting in the dark, perfectly preserved, waiting for the day they are found. But here lies the paradox. The longer they remain sealed, the more likely they are to survive. The moment we open them, we risk destroying them. Exposure to air, light, and modern microbes could cause them to crumble to dust in hours. It would take a level of care and preparation few institutions on Earth are ready for. And so, Even if such vaults were discovered, they might remain closed for years while experts debated how to proceed. In the meantime, rumors would swirl, conspiracy theories would thrive, and perhaps some would try to steal the contents before they could be properly studied. Modern Alexandria complicates this further. The city is alive, chaotic, and densely populated. Excavating beneath it is not like digging in an empty desert. Every street is layered with pipes, power lines, and the lives of 500,000 people. Tunneling to the depths of ancient history could destabilize entire neighborhoods. And so, any search for the vaults must be slow, discreet, and often incomplete. It is entirely possible that construction for a new hotel or subway line could pass within meters of the library's remains and never touch it. And yet, sometimes chance intervenes. A cracked sewer pipe leads engineers to an unknown chamber. A minor earthquake shifts the earth just enough to reveal a buried archway. Small finds like this happen more often than the public hears about. Most are minor, a few coins, a mosaic floor, but each one is a reminder that the deep city is still hiding secrets. If the vaults exist, their discovery would be the greatest archaeological event in human history. Imagine the moment when a sealed door is opened, and the light of the 21st century falls upon shelves untouched for over 1,000 years. Imagine the scent of ancient papyrus rising into the air, the ink of lost worlds returning to human eyes. Every historian, every scientist, every philosopher alive would be drawn to that place. And yet, there would be danger. Because knowledge is power, and power is never neutral. What if those vaults contained blueprints for machines centuries ahead of their time? What if they described medicines that could cure diseases still killing millions? Would such treasures be shared freely, or locked away once more? This time not by accident, but by design. History tells us that discoveries of immense value often become the property of the few. In the wrong hands, the rebirth of the library could be as destructive as its loss. And so, we are left with a haunting possibility. Perhaps the vaults do exist, and perhaps they have been found already, just not by those who would share them. Perhaps the knowledge of the ancients is already in use, guiding decisions in ways the public can only guess at. Or perhaps it still sleeps beneath our feet in the dark, waiting for the right hands to wake it. Until then, every step through the streets of Alexandria is a step over buried history, and every shadowed alley could hide the doorway to humanity's forgotten mind. The Ptolemies did not merely rule Egypt, they curated it, crafted it into a jewel of their empire, and within that jewel, they built a treasury of thought unlike any before. The Library of Alexandria was not an accident of history. It was the deliberate weaponization of knowledge. The Ptolemaic kings understood that power lay not only in armies or gold, but in the control of ideas. Ships arriving in Alexandria's harbor were searched for manuscripts as carefully as for contraband. Scrolls from Athens, Babylon, and distant India were seized, copied, and stored in vast archives. The originals, more often than not, remained in Alexandria. Their owners compensated, if at all, only with the copies. This was not theft in the shadows, it was policy, a declaration that the Ptolemies intended to make Alexandria the memory of the world. But among the scrolls of poetry, astronomy, and philosophy, there were others, works that did not fit the mold of polite scholarship. Ancient rumors speak of forbidden treatises locked in private rooms, accessible only to the king and his most trusted scholars. These were the Ptolemaic archives, a shadow collection distinct from the public halls, containing inventions, blueprints, and formulas too dangerous or too politically volatile to share openly. Consider the reports of Heron of Alexandria, an inventor centuries ahead of his time. Even the fragments of his known work suggest a mind capable of building steam engines, automatic doors, and mechanical theaters. If such devices were the ones permitted for public display, what might have been hidden? There are whispers, passed down through the centuries, of war machines capable of hurling projectiles with terrifying force, chemical compounds that could ignite on water, and lenses so finely made they could set fire to distant ships under the sun's rays. In an age where empires balanced on the edge of a spear, such inventions could alter the course of history overnight. The Ptolemaic dynasty had every reason to suppress some discoveries. The political climate of the Hellenistic world was a delicate one. A single technological leap could shatter alliances or invite invasion. A philosopher discovering a proof that undermined the divine right of kings. a physician creating a cure that shifted the balance of power between cities. Such knowledge, if unleashed, could topple thrones. Better to keep it locked away, to preserve the advantage in silence. And then there are the stranger tales. Some claim the archives contain works from civilizations far older than Egypt, fragments from Atlantis, or from kingdoms erased by floods and earthquakes long before recorded history. Others speak of astronomical charts mapping not only the movements of planets, but the orbits of stars invisible to the naked eye. There are even accounts of devices described as self-moving, or thinking, objects that sound eerily like early machines, perhaps even primitive forms of automation or computation. To modern ears, such claims sound like myth, but history gives us reason to pause before dismissing them entirely. Time and again, discoveries thought to be impossible for ancient cultures have been proven real. The Antikythera mechanism, a 2000-year-old Greek computer, Roman concrete that grows stronger with age, surgical tools from India, capable of procedures modern surgeons only rediscovered centuries later. If these could survive in the archaeological record, how much more could have been hidden away intentionally, never given the chance to be lost in battle or decay? The Ptolemaic kings also had a habit of recruiting the finest minds of their age, often under conditions of secrecy. Scholars who refused were sometimes coerced. Those who agreed might find themselves working in areas of study forbidden in their homelands. In such an environment, breakthroughs would have been inevitable. But what was done with them afterward is the question that fuels so much speculation. Were they hidden because they were incomplete, because they were dangerous, or because their existence could destabilize the carefully crafted narratives of the rulers? We must also consider the philosophy of secrecy itself. To the Ptolemies, withholding knowledge was not inherently immoral. It was a strategic necessity. They ruled a diverse and often fractious empire. They faced rival powers in Rome, Carthage, and the Eastern kingdoms. If the archives contained, for example, a method to produce steel stronger than any in the known world, it would be guarded as closely as the royal treasury. If there were maps of unknown lands, rich in resources, they would not be published for scholars. They would be used to plan expeditions, to stake claims before others even knew such places existed. This leads to the darker possibility that some inventions were not only hidden, but actively destroyed. If a creation was deemed too destabilizing, if it could not be controlled, replicated safely, or kept out of enemy hands, it might have been erased entirely, its inventor sworn to silence or eliminated. Such acts would leave little trace, save for hints in letters, odd references in other works, or sudden gaps in the historical record. And yet, if the library, or parts of it, still exist in secret, it is the Ptolemaic archives that many treasure hunters and theorists dream of finding. For the public halls might contain knowledge we already suspect, but the hidden chambers could hold revelations we have never imagined. It is here, in these forbidden shelves, that the real power of the ancient world might still sleep. Imagine opening a stone door in the depths of Alexandria and finding racks of bronze cylinders, each containing rolled papyrus sealed in wax. You lift one carefully, carry it to a table, and unroll it under soft light. There, in faded ink, is a diagram, a device that should not exist until centuries later, or a list of medicinal plants that grow nowhere in today's world, suggesting lost ecosystems, lost cures. Every page would be a key, every symbol a code waiting to be broken. But with each discovery would come a choice, to share it with the world or to guard it, as the Ptolemies once did, from the chaos it might unleash. And perhaps that is the real question that haunts us. If the Ptolemaic archives were found tomorrow, would we be any different from those who once locked them away? Or would we, too, choose secrecy over transparency, control over chaos? The answer may determine whether the rebirth of the Library of Alexandria would be an age of enlightenment or an age of shadows. There are moments in history when human knowledge surges ahead, only to vanish as if swallowed by the earth. Medicine, the art of healing, has followed this strange rhythm for millennia, rising to dazzling heights in certain civilizations before collapsing into superstition and forgetfulness. What if the Library of Alexandria held the record of every one of these peaks? What if its shelves bore the accumulated medical wisdom of Egypt's temple physicians, India's Ayurvedic masters, Greece's Hippocratic schools, China's herbalists, and knowledge from lands whose names we no longer know. The medical texts said to have been stored in Alexandria were not mere lists of herbs and rituals. Some scholars believe they may have contained anatomical studies from human dissection, centuries before such practices were banned in parts of the world. Imagine a scroll describing the circulation of blood long before William Harvey's 17th century discovery, knowledge that could have advanced surgery and treatment by over 1,000 years. Imagine a treatise on antiseptics, perhaps noting that certain moldy plants prevented infection, anticipating penicillin by millennia. In the right hands, such information could have saved millions, but medicine was only part of it. The lost sciences may have stretched into fields we barely recognize today. Alchemy that was not mere superstition, but an early form of chemistry. Astronomical data so precise it could predict eclipses centuries in advance. Engineering principles that allowed for structures resisting earthquakes without modern steel. Some claim the archives may have held the blueprints for devices like the Antikythera mechanism, only more advanced, more widespread, perhaps adapted for navigation, irrigation, or even energy generation. Consider how much knowledge the ancient Egyptians alone possessed. Advanced surgical tools carved from copper and bronze, methods for setting broken bones, even rudimentary dentistry complete with drilled teeth and gold wire braces. If Alexandria held their complete records alongside those of Greek physicians like Galen, Chinese medical compendiums like the Huangdi Neijing, and Indian works such as the Sushruta Samhita, it would have been the most comprehensive medical database the world had ever known. Then imagine coupling that with records of diseases now extinct. Some scrolls may have described pathogens we have never encountered, along with treatments forgotten in the dust. Others could have detailed pandemics from thousands of years ago, tracking their spread, their symptoms, and the measures taken to control them. Such records could be invaluable today, not only to fight new outbreaks, but to prepare for diseases yet to emerge. In the sciences beyond medicine, there are hints in surviving fragments. Ancient Greek texts describe lenses capable of magnifying to surprising degrees, suggesting that some form of proto-microscopy might have existed. Roman historians mention liquid fire used in naval battles, a substance possibly similar to Greek fire, a formula still unknown to modern chemistry. There are references to lost alloys, metals lighter and stronger than bronze, that never reappeared in later history. If the library preserved the methods for creating them, it could revolutionize technology even now. It is not hard to see why such knowledge might have been guarded or even suppressed. Medicine that could prolong life might threaten political or religious structures built upon mortality. Technologies that could produce endless clean water or inexhaustible energy might upend entire economies. And in the wrong hands, these same discoveries could be turned toward destruction. Some theories suggest that fragments of this knowledge did survive, but in incomplete, garbled forms. A healing herb mentioned in a medieval text, its name distorted through centuries of copying. A machine described in legend, dismissed as myth because no one could recreate it. The library's role might have been to keep the complete versions intact, ready for when society was ready. Though who decided what ready meant is another question. What if, deep beneath the city, there is a vault where these medical and scientific scrolls still sit in neat rows? What if they were sealed not out of neglect, but by choice, hidden until the right moment, or the right person, comes to claim them? Opening such a vault could change the trajectory of humanity overnight. Diseases eradicated, starvation ended, technologies leapfrogging centuries ahead. But the change would not be without cost. Every great leap in history has brought both light and shadow. Picture the scene. A team of archaeologists pries open a stone door, untouched for 2,000 years. Inside, the air is dry and still. On the shelves, hundreds of scrolls bound in leather, their labels written in Greek, Demotic, Sanskrit, and scripts we cannot identify. One is unrolled, a diagram of the human heart, labeled with details of its valves and chambers. Another shows a process for extracting a rare element from stone, something that could serve as a powerful fuel. Each discovery sets off ripples far beyond the walls of the chamber. And yet, the ethical question looms. Would we share it freely, knowing it could render current industries obsolete, collapse economies, and shift power away from those who hold it now? Or would we repeat the mistakes of the past, hoarding, hiding, rationing the truth in the name of stability? If the Library of Alexandria still exists, its medical and scientific texts may be both a salvation and a test. They would ask us not only what we are capable of learning, but what we are capable of handling. And perhaps this is the greatest lost science of all, the science of using knowledge wisely without letting its power consume us. Maps are more than lines and shapes. They are claims about reality. They tell us not just where things are, but what exists. And perhaps more importantly, what does not. The Library of Alexandria, in its prime, may have been the single greatest repository of cartographic knowledge the ancient world had ever assembled. It is said that the Ptolemies commanded their scholars to collect every map from every ship that docked in Alexandria's harbor. They took charts from Phoenician traders who sailed beyond the Pillars of Hercules, from Egyptian captains who followed the coast of Africa far past the Red Sea, from Greek explorers who ventured into the Black Sea and beyond. The originals stayed in Alexandria. Copies went back to the owners. Over decades, the library would have accumulated a view of the world far more complete, and perhaps far stranger, than anything in surviving records. What if some of those maps depicted continents we no longer recognize? What if the library held evidence of lands lost to time, sunken beneath oceans, buried under ice, or wiped clean by cataclysm? There are whispers in ancient writings of islands beyond the great waters and realms under the southern stars that do not match any known geography. Plato's Atlantis is the most famous, but it is only one of many. Hindu texts speak of vanished kingdoms swallowed by the sea. Polynesian oral histories tell of great voyages to lands that no longer appear on modern charts. Even Norse sagas hint at places beyond Greenland, long before Columbus or the Vikings reached the shores of North America. If such maps were in the library, they could have been based on observations, not myth. Consider the possibility that ancient mariners traveled farther than we think, carried by favorable currents, navigating by stars with a precision we underestimate. The Piri Reis map, drawn in the 16th century but based on far older sources, appears to show the coast of South America, and perhaps even Antarctica, centuries before it was officially discovered. If such fragments survived into the Renaissance, how much more could have been present in the library at its height? The political implications of such maps would have been enormous. A ruler with knowledge of lands rich in resources, unclaimed by rivals, would hold a power beyond armies. Control of trade routes, access to rare minerals, and contact with unknown civilizations could shift the balance of power overnight. No wonder some maps might have been locked away in private collections within the library, accessible only to the Ptolemaic court and their closest navigators. We also have to ask, what happened to these places if they existed? Some may have been destroyed by volcanic eruptions, like Thera. Others may have been engulfed by rising seas at the end of the last ice age, when melting glaciers raised ocean levels by over 100 meters. A continent could vanish from human memory in a few generations, especially if survivors were few and scattered. In such cases, maps would be the only proof that these lands had ever existed. Imagine walking into a sealed chamber beneath Alexandria and unrolling a map painted in rich pigments on cured parchment. It shows the familiar outlines of Africa, Europe, and Asia, but also an immense landmass in the southern hemisphere, ringed by glaciers, or a chain of islands stretching across the Pacific, far more numerous than those we know today. Symbols mark harbors, mountains, and rivers, implying these places were visited, charted, and perhaps even settled. The text around the edges describes journeys lasting months, guided by constellations that no longer match the night sky due to the slow wobble of Earth's axis. Could these have been remnants of a seafaring civilization that predated all known empires? If so, their disappearance would leave a gap in the human story so vast that modern history would be only a fragment of what once was. Such knowledge, if revealed today, would rewrite textbooks, redraw borders, and challenge national claims to first discovery. It could even spark disputes over resources in regions currently considered international waters. And here lies the danger. Maps are not neutral. They are tools of ambition, instruments of control. In the wrong hands, an ancient chart could become the trigger for conflict, as nations rush to stake claims on newly rediscovered lands. It is easy to imagine why such documents, if found, might be quietly hidden again, not to protect the past, but to manage the future. Yet, the allure is irresistible. Explorers, historians, and treasure hunters alike dream of finding one of these maps, not only for the glory of discovery, but for the thrill of glimpsing a world that no longer exists. For them, the library is less an archive than a portal, a door to a version of Earth we have never seen, but that our ancestors might have known well. If the Library of Alexandria still lies hidden, its cartographic vaults could hold the most profound geographical revelations in human history. They could show us that the edges of our known world are not boundaries at all, but scars, reminders of what the planet has lost and what it still hides beneath its oceans and ice. When people imagine the loss of the Library of Alexandria, they picture flames. Yet, not all disappearances come by fire. Some treasures are not destroyed. They are moved quietly, deliberately, to places where they can be hidden from danger or stolen for private gain. Among historians and conspiracy theorists alike, one persistent idea refuses to fade: that a significant portion of the library's collection was never destroyed at all, but secretly transferred to Constantinople, the glittering capital of the Byzantine Empire, and perhaps even beyond. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome's eastern half, was a city of contradictions. Deeply Christian, yet inheriting the vast archives of pagan antiquity. Its rulers understood the value of knowledge as both a tool and a weapon. Constantinople possessed its own legendary library, which at its height held tens of thousands of manuscripts. Some accounts suggest that certain texts in its collection were far older than the city itself, possibly brought from Alexandria during periods of instability. In the centuries after Caesar's siege, after Aurelian's reconquest, and especially after Theophilus's destruction of the Serapeum, the fate of the remaining scrolls was uncertain. It would have been entirely plausible for ambitious scholars, traders, or political envoys to spirit away priceless works to the one city in the region capable of protecting them. There is a tantalizing historical overlap. Alexandria and Constantinople were not merely trading partners. They were deeply entangled in religious, political, and cultural affairs. Clerics, bureaucrats, and envoys moved between them constantly. A single caravan or fleet of ships could have carried hundreds, even thousands of scrolls under the guise of religious or diplomatic cargo. And unlike the fires and mobs that consumed other collections, Constantinople offered walls, garrisons, and a sophisticated bureaucracy capable of preserving texts for centuries. But if the library's treasures truly reached the Bosporus, their safety would not have been guaranteed forever. The Imperial Library of Constantinople itself suffered multiple fires over the centuries, the worst in 475 CE, when much of its collection was lost. Yet even then, some works may have been copied and hidden in monasteries across the empire, distributed so no single disaster could erase them entirely. The trail grows colder as we move into the Middle Ages. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, Constantinople was sacked by Western European knights. They looted not just gold and relics, but manuscripts, art, and scientific instruments. Many treasures vanished into private collections in Venice, Genoa, and beyond. It is here that the theory branches. Some believe fragments of the Alexandrian collection entered the hands of the Catholic Church, perhaps finding their way into the Vatican Library, while others think certain works traveled eastward, traded to Muslim scholars in the Abbasid Caliphate, or carried along the Silk Road to Persia, India, and China. The Abbasids themselves were notorious gatherers of foreign knowledge, translating Greek and Latin works into Arabic during the Islamic Golden Age. It is not impossible that a physician in Baghdad or an astronomer in Samarkand once worked from an Alexandrian original, unaware of its full provenance. In this theory, the Library of Alexandria did not die. It was scattered like seeds, some sprouting into the intellectual renaissances of distant lands, others lying dormant, still hidden. And what of the idea that the knowledge traveled even farther? There are fringe theories, romantic to some, absurd to others, that a few manuscripts were carried west into Europe's dark forests, eventually surfacing in the hidden archives of secret societies. Others imagine they went east to Tibet, locked in monastery vaults in the Himalayas, or south to Ethiopia, guarded by ancient Christian orders with no intention of revealing their treasures. In each telling, the knowledge survives not as an open library, but as a jealously guarded inheritance. We should ask ourselves why such a transfer, if it happened, would be kept secret. The answer may be the same now as it was then. Knowledge is power, and too much of it can destabilize. A text revealing advanced navigation techniques could upend trade monopolies. A treatise on medicine centuries ahead of its time could undermine the authority of established practitioners. The fewer who have access, the more valuable and controllable it becomes. This secrecy could also explain why so many ancient references hint at works we have never seen. A medieval scholar quotes a passage from a lost Greek historian. An Arab polymath describes a machine with no known origin. A Renaissance mapmaker includes geographic details no contemporary explorer could have known. Each is a breadcrumb, leading back to a possible source that no one alive has ever fully glimpsed. If even a fraction of the library's collection reached Constantinople, the implications are staggering. Some of it may still exist, buried in the vaults of monasteries in Greece or Turkey, miscatalogued in provincial archives, or lying unnoticed in the stacks of Europe's oldest libraries. Other parts may have been destroyed in later centuries, consumed in the fires of conquest, or lost to the slow rot of neglect. And then there is the most tantalizing possibility of all, that a hidden cache still exists, intact in some forgotten Byzantine stronghold, sealed away when invaders approached and never reclaimed. It could be waiting in a coastal fortress crumbling into the sea, or in an unmarked chamber beneath a church whose foundations predate Christendom itself. If the Library of Alexandria's heart truly beat on in Constantinople and beyond, then its story is not one of death, but of exile. And like all exiles, it may one day return, not as the grand institution it once was, but as fragments and whispers, enough to remind us that history is rarely as final as we think. In the legends that coil around the Library of Alexandria, like ivy around a ruin, there is one that feels more like a whispered confession than a historical account. It tells of a secret order, a brotherhood, or perhaps something less formal but equally committed, who took it upon themselves to guard the library's most precious texts when the city descended into chaos. They were scribes, scholars, and servants who understood that scrolls could be stolen, burned, or censored, but ideas could be made to survive, if one was willing to risk everything. The tale begins in the final days before one of the library's many assaults, when word came that soldiers were marching toward the district. The head librarian, sometimes named Demetrius, sometimes another, called a handful of trusted aides into a candlelit chamber. There they devised a desperate plan. Certain texts, the most irreplaceable, would be copied by hand in secret. The originals would be hidden or spirited away. The copies, disguised, would be sent far beyond Alexandria, under the care of those willing to disappear into anonymity. These scribes were more than mere copyists. They were translators, encryptors, and couriers. A scroll might be split into sections, each given to a different messenger traveling to a different land, so that only when reunited would the text be whole again. Some versions were hidden in plain sight, embedded within religious hymns, merchant ledgers, or genealogies, their true content invisible to the untrained eye. Others were buried in sealed clay jars and sunk into desert sands or river mud, where dryness and darkness would preserve them. The Brotherhood, if it existed, was not bound to one place or century. Generations later, in faraway monasteries, there are records of monks who spoke an odd dialect of Greek and kept to themselves, working late into the night over manuscripts no one else was allowed to see. In medieval Spain, Jewish scholars in exile are said to have carried with them fragments of ancient Greek and Egyptian texts, passed down through families sworn to guard them. In the libraries of Timbuktu, traders from North Africa stored manuscripts on astronomy and medicine that some claim traced their lineage back to the Nile Delta. If we follow this thread, the Brotherhood's purpose was not to hoard knowledge for their own gain, but to protect it from those who would abuse or destroy it. To them, the survival of a dangerous idea was better than its extinction, even if it meant locking it away until the world was ready. They must have known they could never save it all, but perhaps saving pieces was enough. A single preserved scroll could one day inspire a mind that would rebuild what was lost. The idea of such a group raises questions that cannot be easily answered. How would they choose what to save? Did they favor works of science over poetry, or philosophy over mathematics? Would they protect dangerous weapons of knowledge, formulas, designs, political treatises, as fiercely as they would literature and art? And how would they ensure the next generation of guardians was worthy of the trust? The wrong hands could twist a cure into a poison, a tool into a weapon. Some accounts, often dismissed as fantasy, claim that the Brotherhood developed elaborate initiation rites. A scribe would be tested not only on their skill with pen and ink, but on their discretion, loyalty, and philosophical understanding of knowledge itself. They would swear oaths before relics taken from the library, perhaps a fragment of papyrus, a stylus, or a vial of ink, and pledge to place the preservation of truth above their own lives. To betray the Brotherhood, it is said, was to vanish without a trace. Over the centuries, the Brotherhood's role may have shifted from active preservation to patient guardianship. When a dangerous ruler or invading army threatened their archives, they would scatter, taking the most important works with them. When peace returned, they would reunite in hidden rooms, piecing together the scattered fragments, recopying fading ink before it vanished forever. And perhaps they still exist. In the deep archives of certain monasteries, there are books whose provenance cannot be explained, pages filled with symbols no cataloging system can place. In private collections, rare volumes appear without history, their bindings older than the nations in which they are found. From time to time, a scholar stumbles across a reference in an obscure letter, someone thanking the keepers for granting them a glimpse of a text from the great library. If the Brotherhood endures, they have mastered the art of invisibility. They do not announce themselves. They do not publish manifestos. They simply wait, watch, and decide when and to whom their treasures should be revealed. Perhaps they are waiting still, holding back the final fragments of Alexandria until humanity proves it can handle them without turning them into tools of domination. Imagine it. Somewhere in the world, a room lit by a single lamp where an unbroken chain of guardians has sat for 2,000 years, turning the same pages that once rested in the hands of scholars long turned to dust. If you found them, would you be worthy to read what they have kept? Or would they close the book, smile faintly, and tell you, not yet? When we speak of the Library of Alexandria's destruction, Rome's shadow is never far from the conversation. For all the myths of accidental fires and collateral damage, there is another line of thought, darker, more deliberate, that suggests the erasure of the library was not only an unfortunate consequence of war, but a calculated act driven by political motives. Rome, after all, was not simply a conqueror of lands. It was a curator and editor of history itself. The Roman Republic, and later the Empire, understood the strategic value of knowledge. They collected it, assimilated it, and, when necessary, suppressed it. In their view, history and science were not neutral. They were tools of governance. Control over narratives was as vital as control over armies. If a text challenged Roman ideology, questioned their authority, or elevated rival civilizations, it was dangerous, not because it was false, but because it was true. The first major Roman entanglement with the library came during Julius Caesar's Alexandrian War in 48 BCE. In the traditional telling, Caesar ordered ships in the harbor set ablaze to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. The fire spread to nearby warehouses, and some say it reached the library's scrolls. Whether the loss was partial or total is debated, but what is less discussed is the possibility that Caesar's forces took what they wanted before the flames. A chaotic battlefield offers perfect cover for selective looting. Scrolls on navigation, engineering, and medicine would have been immensely valuable to an empire hungry for expansion. In the centuries that followed, Rome's relationship with knowledge remained one of acquisition and control. By the 3rd century CE, as the empire struggled with internal unrest and external threats, Alexandria's intellectual independence would have been viewed with suspicion. A city that possessed records of civilizations older than Rome itself could inspire dangerous comparisons, reminding the world that Rome was not the first great power, and might not be the last. The political motives for erasure become even clearer when we consider the role of religion. By the 4th century, Christianity had become the empire's dominant faith, and the church was closely intertwined with imperial authority. Pagan texts, heretical philosophies, and scientific works that contradicted theological doctrine were increasingly suppressed. The destruction of the Serapeum in 391 CE under the orders of Patriarch Theophilus was framed as the triumph of Christianity over paganism. Yet it also served Rome's interests by removing a major center of alternative thought. Eliminating rival sources of history allowed the empire to present its own version as absolute. It is possible that Rome's erasure of the library was not a single event, but a policy carried out in stages. Some works may have been quietly seized and transferred to Rome, Constantinople, or private collections of powerful families. Others may have been deliberately destroyed to prevent their contents from undermining political or religious control. The burning of scrolls in public squares, documented in various cities, was as much a performance as an act of destruction, a message to the population about who decided what knowledge was permissible. One must also consider the economic motives. Rome's empire was built on monopolies, of trade routes, military technology, and cultural prestige. If the library contained maps of unclaimed territories, records of untapped resources, or methods for producing goods more efficiently, keeping such information out of rival hands would have been a priority. In this light, the destruction of the library was not the irrational vandalism of barbarians, but the cold calculus of empire. There are tantalizing hints that some of the library's contents did survive in Rome's custody. Roman authors occasionally reference texts that no longer exist, citing works of history, science, or philosophy that scholars have never been able to locate. In some cases, these references appear once and are never repeated, as if the original was accessible only to a select few. It is not difficult to imagine that such works were stored in private imperial archives, available only to the emperor and his advisors. And yet, history reminds us that no archive is safe forever. Rome itself suffered invasions, fires, and political purges. If Alexandrian scrolls did make it to the heart of the empire, some may have been lost in these later upheavals. Others might have been carried off as spoils by successor states, passing through many hands until their origins were forgotten. The political motive for erasure, however, is the thread that ties these possibilities together. Rome's rulers understood that knowledge could topple empires as surely as armies could. A single text revealing the weaknesses of Roman governance, or offering a model for a more just society, could plant seeds of rebellion. A treatise proving that other civilizations had achieved greatness without Roman rule could shatter the myth of Rome's inevitability. This is why the idea of Rome's deliberate involvement in the library's disappearance remains so compelling. It reframes the loss not as a random tragedy, but as an act of control, a reminder that empires do not simply inherit history, they curate it to suit their needs. If fragments of Alexandria's collection still exist, they may be buried not under sand or ash, but in the guarded vaults of institutions that trace their lineage back to Rome's own halls of power. In the end, whether Rome burned the library to the ground, smuggled its treasures away, or quietly strangled it over centuries, the result was the same, the narrowing of the historical record to favor the empire's narrative. And perhaps that was the point all along, not to destroy knowledge entirely, but to decide which truths would survive. In the modern age, the myth of the Library of Alexandria has shifted from the realm of ancient tragedy to the theater of global intrigue. For centuries, the story ended with loss, the flames, the mobs, the slow decay. But in recent decades, a different narrative has emerged, one that suggests the library, or at least parts of it, did not vanish into history's graveyard. Instead, it claims, the most important remnants were found, recovered in silence, and placed under the control of modern intelligence agencies. It is not a story you find in official archives. It lives in the margins, in whispers from former operatives, in heavily redacted documents, in chance comments from researchers who claim to have seen something they shouldn't. According to this narrative, sometime in the 20th century, perhaps during the colonial excavations of Egypt, perhaps during Cold War-era digs in the Mediterranean, teams stumbled upon sealed chambers containing manuscripts, scrolls, or artifacts linked to the ancient library. The theory's logic is seductively simple. If such a discovery were made, it would be far too valuable to announce. These would not be dusty relics fit for museum glass. They could be blueprints for technologies centuries ahead of their time, medical knowledge capable of transforming public health, or historical records that challenge the legitimacy of modern borders and governments. In the zero-sum game of geopolitics, whoever controlled that information could alter the balance of power without firing a shot. Some point to the geopolitical context of the mid-20th century as fertile ground for such a secret. Egypt was a focal point of global interest, caught between Western powers, the Soviet bloc, and emerging regional ambitions. Archaeological digs often had dual purposes, with research teams, staffed in part by intelligence operatives. A sealed vault discovered beneath Alexandria or in a nearby desert ruin could have been quietly emptied, its contents crated and flown to a secure facility half a world away. There are parallels in documented history. The looting of Iraqi museums in 2003, in which priceless Mesopotamian artifacts disappeared into private or state-controlled collections, demonstrated how easily cultural treasures can be appropriated under the cover of conflict. During World War II, Nazi and Allied forces alike targeted libraries, archives, and art collections, not simply for their material value, but for the knowledge and influence they represented. In the case of the Library of Alexandria, the theory often centers on 2 or 3 possible custodians. The CIA is frequently named, accused of securing artifacts during operations in the Middle East and storing them in undisclosed archives. The KGB and later Russian intelligence agencies are also mentioned, with rumors of a black library beneath Moscow containing seized texts. Some versions even suggest cooperation between rival agencies, an unspoken pact to keep the material hidden from the public while exploiting it for strategic advantage. The alleged contents of these caches vary wildly, depending on the storyteller. Some speak of ancient maps showing energy-rich regions before modern exploration. Others describe formulas for alloys lighter and stronger than anything yet mass-produced. There are accounts of scrolls detailing advanced surgical techniques, star charts mapping astronomical phenomena only recently rediscovered, and political treatises that, if widely known, could destabilize nations by revealing suppressed histories. Why keep it secret? The public explanation, if there were ever one, might mirror the logic of the Ptolemies themselves, that such knowledge in the wrong hands could be catastrophic. Advanced technology could trigger arms races. Medical breakthroughs could collapse entire industries before societies could adapt. Historical revelations could undermine political stability, leading to unrest or even war. In this framing, secrecy is presented not as greed, but as guardianship. But there is another, more cynical view, that the secrecy serves not to protect humanity, but to consolidate power. If an agency controls technology that makes conventional energy obsolete, it can manipulate global markets indefinitely. If it holds historical evidence delegitimizing certain regimes, it can extract concessions behind closed doors. Knowledge becomes a currency more valuable than gold, and the fewer who possess it, the higher its price. There have been tantalizing hints, though never proof. In the 1970s, an American archaeologist working in Alexandria claimed to have been approached by men from the embassy after unearthing a sealed chamber. His dig was shut down within days, and the artifacts were never logged in Egypt's official records. In the 1990s, a set of ancient manuscripts surfaced briefly in a European auction house, only to be purchased anonymously and vanish. Some scholars who examined them insisted they contained astronomical calculations, far beyond anything known in the ancient Mediterranean. In our age of leaks, it is striking how little hard evidence has emerged, if the claims are true. Perhaps the material is so tightly controlled that only a handful of people on the planet know its full scope. Or perhaps the modern custodians have mastered the same lesson the Brotherhood of Scribes allegedly learned 2,000 years ago, that the surest way to protect dangerous knowledge is to bury it so deeply, even most of its guardians cannot reach it. If there is truth to these modern claims, then the Library of Alexandria has not been lost. It has been nationalized, weaponized, and repurposed. It would mean that the dream of universal access to humanity's accumulated wisdom is, in our time, less a dream than a bargaining chip in the shadow games of statecraft. And if that is the case, then the greatest tragedy is not that the library burned in the ancient world. It is that, in the modern one, it might still exist, and we may never be allowed to read it. If tomorrow the lost heart of the Library of Alexandria were found, its scrolls intact, its diagrams legible, its maps and treatises waiting in perfect preservation, the world would not react as one. It would fracture. There would be celebration, yes, but beneath it, currents of fear and calculation. For the truth is that some knowledge, however beautiful, carries risks so profound that to release it without thought might not be an act of enlightenment, but of destruction. History has shown us that every great leap in knowledge is a double-edged sword. The same principles that can light a city can also level it. The same chemistry that cures disease can craft poisons. We know this because we have lived it. in the atom's split, in the manipulation of genes, in the creation of networks so vast that a single idea can ripple across continents in seconds. And if the library contained knowledge far beyond what we possess today, it is naive to think all of it would be benevolent. Consider medicine. What if the library held cures for diseases that still ravage humanity? The temptation to rejoice is natural, but the introduction of such cures could collapse entire industries, destabilize economies, and trigger political struggles over who gets access first. Nations might hoard the treatments as bargaining chips. Black markets would emerge. And the same biological insights that can heal could also be weaponized, creating pathogens targeted with surgical precision. The sciences would offer similar paradoxes. A scroll detailing a method for creating a virtually unlimited energy source could liberate the world from fossil fuels, but it could also empower regimes or groups with no moral restraint, allowing them to pursue ambitions without dependence on global systems that currently act as a check on their power. A lost formula for an indestructible alloy could revolutionize infrastructure, but it could also birth weapons impossible to destroy. And what of political knowledge? The library may have preserved historical accounts that undermine the legitimacy of certain nations, religions, or cultural narratives. Revealing them could right historical wrongs, but it could also ignite new conflicts, resurrect old hatreds, and fracture societies along deep, ancient fault lines. Information is not just data, it is identity. And identities built over centuries do not dissolve quietly. Even philosophy, the most abstract of disciplines, carries risk. A forgotten school of thought could emerge from the library that reframes the meaning of life, morality, or human purpose so radically that existing belief systems crumble. For some, this would be liberation. For others, it would be existential chaos. Entire social orders have collapsed for less. This is why the idea of guardianship persists in every era, from the alleged brotherhood of scribes in antiquity to modern intelligence agencies. There is a recurring belief that certain knowledge must be withheld until humanity is ready. But who decides readiness? What criteria exist for determining when a dangerous truth becomes safe? And is it ever truly safe? Or does the passage of time simply change the nature of the risk? The danger is not only in the content itself, but in the inequality of access. If a handful of governments or corporations controlled the contents of the library, they could tilt the world in their favor indefinitely. Technological monopolies would deepen. Economic gaps would widen. The rest of humanity would be forced to trust or fear those who claim to act as stewards. There is also the psychological dimension. Humans are not purely rational beings. We respond to revelation with emotion, excitement, fear, anger, disbelief. A sudden flood of knowledge could overwhelm, not enlighten. It could spark movements too fast for institutions to adapt, or reactionary forces desperate to turn back the tide. And yet, to hide knowledge forever carries its own cost. Secrets calcify. They breed mistrust. They create an elite who believe themselves above the rest of humanity. The longer such knowledge is hidden, the more it becomes a weapon in itself, a tool of manipulation, a source of leverage, a shadow government of the mind. Perhaps the real challenge is not in deciding whether to reveal or conceal, but in finding a way to release dangerous truths with context, guidance, and safeguards. Slowly, deliberately, like easing pressure from a sealed vessel. But this requires a kind of global cooperation we have rarely achieved, and an honesty about motives that is even rarer. If the Library of Alexandria still exists, then somewhere in the dark, there may be ideas capable of remaking the world in ways we cannot predict. To bring them into the light would be to take a step from which there is no return. It would be a gamble, not only on the power of the knowledge itself, but on our own maturity as a species. The final risk, then, is not that the library's wisdom will be lost forever. It is that we will find it, open it, and discover too late that we were never ready. Imagine it. A door sealed for over 2,000 years swings open. The stale air of antiquity rushes out to greet the modern world, and in that moment, the distance between past and present collapses. Inside lies the Library of Alexandria, not in ruin, but in perfection. Scrolls, codices, and tablets waiting in quiet stacks. The knowledge that once illuminated the ancient world is ours again. The question then becomes, what could humanity achieve if we recovered it? The first wave of discovery would be euphoric. Scholars, scientists, and philosophers from every nation would converge on the trove. We would find lost works of history that fill in the blank centuries, giving voice to civilizations erased by conquest and catastrophe. We would uncover maps charting the world as it was before coastlines shifted and islands sank. Languages thought forever dead could be reconstructed in full, allowing us to read inscriptions and records that have been mute for millennia. Medicine would be transformed. The library could contain complete medical traditions, from Egypt, Greece, India, China, and beyond, each preserved at their peak before war, plague, or dogma disrupted their continuity. Diseases that still afflict us might meet their match in treatments devised thousands of years ago. We could rediscover botanical knowledge of plants extinct in the wild, yet capable of being regrown from preserved seeds or genetic descriptions. Ancient surgical techniques, lost herbal formulations, and preventive care methods could revolutionize healthcare, not just curing illness, but extending healthy human lifespan. In the sciences, the impact could be nothing short of a second renaissance, compressed into a single generation. The library may hold engineering principles that allow for stronger, more sustainable infrastructure, chemistry that produces materials far superior to our modern alloys, astronomical observations that predate and confirm our current models, or perhaps challenge them. Energy research could leap forward if the scrolls describe methods for harnessing forces we only partially understand today. An unbroken chain of experimental data from ancient to modern times would allow us to see patterns and possibilities hidden by the gaps in our fragmented history. Art and culture would be reborn. Lost epics, plays, and poems would enrich the global canon, offering new archetypes and narratives to inspire creativity. We might find entire musical traditions preserved in notation, ready to be played again after centuries of silence. Architectural designs and mathematical proportions from vanished cities could inform the skylines of the future, blending ancient beauty with modern innovation. The political impact would be profound. Historical records might reveal the true origins of nations, the unvarnished accounts of rulers, the real causes of wars. This could lead to reconciliation in some cases, and in others, deep unrest, as long-accepted narratives crumble. But the opportunity to rebuild international relationships on a foundation of truth, rather than myth, would be unprecedented. Perhaps most transformative of all would be philosophy. The library likely contained entire schools of thought unknown to us, systems of ethics, metaphysics, and social organization that could offer alternatives to the political and economic models that dominate our world today. Some might guide us toward more equitable societies. Others might offer tools for personal resilience and collective harmony in ways modern ideologies have failed to achieve. But recovery would not be without challenges. The sheer volume of information could overwhelm even our digital systems. Translation would take decades, even with artificial intelligence assisting. And the temptation to hoard or weaponize certain discoveries would be immense. Nations and corporations would move quickly to claim the most valuable pieces, whether technological, economic, or strategic. The same knowledge that could heal the planet could also deepen divisions if controlled by a select few. Yet, if humanity could resist these impulses, if we could treat the library not as a cache of treasure to be divided, but as a shared inheritance, the possibilities would be limitless. Imagine a world where renewable energy is so efficient that poverty caused by resource scarcity disappears. Where global health is so advanced that pandemics are relics of the past. Where education draws from the wisdom of every culture and history, fostering a generation of thinkers who see themselves as heirs to the entirety of human civilization, not just their corner of it. We could use ancient agricultural techniques adapted with modern technology to restore ecosystems, feeding billions while healing the planet. We could study long-lost climate records to better predict and mitigate environmental change. We might even find guidance for reaching beyond Earth, if ancient astronomers recorded not just the movements of the stars, but the means to travel among them. In the end, the recovery of the Library of Alexandria would be more than the return of lost books. It would be the return of lost possibilities. Every discovery would be a choice, to use this gift to build a more enlightened, compassionate, and sustainable world, or to repeat the mistakes of the past with sharper tools. The library would test us, as it has tested every generation that has dreamed of it, not just in our ability to understand its contents, but in our wisdom to decide what to do with them. Perhaps the true measure of what humanity could achieve lies not in the knowledge itself, but in our willingness to see it as belonging to all of us. If we could meet that challenge, then the rebirth of the library would not just change the world, it would change what it means to be human. Imagine a vault, not built to serve the present, but to speak to the far future. A vault where the ambitions, failures, discoveries, and dreams of an entire civilization are folded into parchment and ink, sealed away not for us, but for those who will rise long after we have fallen. The Library of Alexandria, in its original grandeur, could have been exactly that, a time capsule for civilizations yet unborn. And if it still exists, somewhere hidden and untouched, then perhaps it is still waiting, not for us, but for them. The idea of a time capsule changes the way we imagine the library, no longer simply a repository for scholars of its own era, but a deliberate message to an unknown audience. Every scroll would then be an act of communication across centuries, an attempt to bridge the void of time. Within it might be instructions on how to avoid the mistakes that brought empires down, or blueprints for technologies to rebuild quickly after disaster, or even warnings about forces, natural or human, that could endanger the planet if forgotten. If the library still exists untouched, it would hold something even rarer than knowledge: context. Our digital archives today are vast but fragile, subject to obsolescence, to erasure, to corruption. The ancient archivists, if they meant to speak to the future, would have chosen materials and methods meant to outlast even the stones of their city. Papyrus sealed in clay, parchment kept in dry chambers, inscriptions etched into metals designed not to rust. In other words, the library may not be a fragile relic. It may be a fortress of memory. What would they have chosen to tell the future? Certainly the sciences, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, because these are tools any civilization will need, whether they live in huts or high-rises. But they might also have included philosophical treatises on governance, justice, and ethics, blueprints for building a stable society from nothing. They may have included stories, myths, and art to preserve the emotional fabric of humanity, knowing that a civilization without memory of beauty will rebuild as a shell. There might also be warnings, records of pandemics, not merely as events but with exact symptoms, causes, and remedies, descriptions of natural disasters, their patterns, their precursors, the ways to survive them, documentation of political collapses and how they began, so that those reading could recognize the signs in their own time. The library could be a survival manual for the species. But perhaps the most startling inclusion would be data about the Earth itself, climate patterns, astronomical records, geological surveys. We think of these as modern sciences, but ancient civilizations observe their environment with a rigor we often underestimate. With thousands of years of uninterrupted observation preserved, future civilizations could leapfrog directly into an advanced understanding of the planet they inherit without repeating our slow climb. The idea of the library as a time capsule also forces us to confront the possibility that it was never meant for everyone. Even in the future, it may have been intended for a select group, a kind of initiation into humanity's deepest knowledge, hidden in symbols, coded in languages that require decades to learn, guarded by myths designed to frighten away the unprepared. In this way, the library would act as a filter, not to keep knowledge secret forever, but to ensure that only those with patience, discipline, and moral restraint could open it. And here lies the paradox. If we found such a library today, would we be the future it was waiting for, or just an impatient midpoint, unready to bear its full weight? Our current civilization, for all its brilliance, is still fractured by greed, nationalism, and mistrust. The question becomes not only can we read it, but should we read it now? If the library is truly a time capsule, it also forces us to see ourselves in reverse. We are not only potential recipients, we are also creators of the next capsule. We too live in a world of knowledge that could save or doom those who come after us. If Alexandria was their message forward, what will be ours? Will our archives survive the centuries, or will we leave only ruins for future archaeologists to puzzle over? Perhaps the greatest gift of finding such a time capsule would be its example. It would remind us that civilizations are not just built for their own survival, but for the survival of meaning beyond their own span. It would challenge us to think in centuries, not election cycles, in millennia, not market quarters. It would invite us to write not just for each other, but for the strangers who will inherit the earth when our names are dust. If we opened it and found inside instructions for the rebuilding of cities, the curing of diseases, the restoration of ecosystems, would we follow them? Or would we, like so many before us, believe that our way is better, our moment more advanced, our needs more urgent? The library's silent judgment might be harsher than we expect. It could show us that we have been solving the wrong problems or asking the wrong questions entirely. To see the library as a time capsule is to imagine that somewhere, hidden beneath the sands or behind the walls of a monastery or locked in a vault beneath the sea, is a conversation still in progress, a dialogue between the dead and the unborn. And if we ever join that conversation, we will have to decide whether we are its closing chapter or just one more link in an unbroken chain. In the end, the Library of Alexandria as a time capsule is not simply about recovering what was lost. It is about realizing that we are already in the middle of a story much larger than ourselves. We are not its authors, but we can choose to be its careful translators. And if we do, perhaps one day when our own civilization is nothing but a memory, our voice will still be heard by those who come next.